In an automating world, it's important for leaders to understand the implications of AI and separate the hype from the reality. And we will be exploring that here at The Evolving Leader over the coming months. At the same time, it's crucial we ask ourselves, what is our value as humans when so much work will be encoded in algorithms? Ask ChatGPT the question, and yes, we get the irony. It spits out some form of answers about decision-making in uncertain situations, creativity and empathy, and moral reasoning. So each of us should be preparing ourselves to invest in the things that will be needed in the future. In this show, we get some clues from the researcher Vaughn Tan, who is looking at how we can distinguish between risk and uncertainty and how that can equip us for meeting this emerging set of realities.
Welcome to The Evolving Leader, a show born out of the belief that there's a need for a deeper and more committed form of leader. John, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling very energized after a week of engaging in the world. I've been out and about, flying around, and I'm feeling great as a result of that. Even though it's Friday, I'm feeling pretty energized. How are you feeling, Emma?
I'm feeling a little bit tired, but less so than I was about half an hour ago because it is Friday. I'm feeling satisfied, had a good week, managed to cover a lot, and also feeling a little bit nervous and intrigued to speak with our guest today. And today we have Vaughn Tan, who's a consultant, an author, a speaker, a toolmaker, and a professor of strategy at University College London School of Management. He received a PhD in organizational behavior from Harvard University. He worked at Google on advertising, Earth maps, space flight, and fusion tables. Vaughn studies innovation and adaptability in the context of uncertainty. His research focuses on processes for hiring, goal setting, and motivation at the team level, and offers specific strategic and tactical recommendations across industries for leaders designing and managing innovative and adaptable teams and organizations. He first came to our attention with his book, The Uncertainty Mindset: Innovation Insights from the Frontiers of Food, which looks at extensive ethnographic research at some of the world's best culinary R&D teams to explain how organizations can design themselves to be more innovative and adaptable to uncertainty. So Vaughn, welcome to The Evolving Leader. How are you feeling today?
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm excited to see that the interests of the Evolving Leader have been running kind of in parallel with mine for a while, and we've not met before. And so it's always nice to meet fellow travelers, especially when you didn't know that you had fellow travelers. So yeah, super excited to speak to you all and talk about things which I think are of mutual interest.
Vaughn, welcome to The Evolving Leader. So let's imagine that we're at a dinner party and you're sitting next to me and I'm a farmer. And I'm not a big techno farmer with lots of crazy automated stuff. I'm just, like a fairly small scale farmer. And I say to you, what do you do? What would you say?
What I would probably say if you were really a small scale farmer is I try and build places where interesting things can happen in much the same way that good small farmers think about how they create settings in which crops can grow well, right? So I think for me, the big difference would be between an industrial scale farmer who thinks that effectiveness and efficiency of how they farm is about inputs and about control. Whereas a small scale farmer, not so much controlling stuff, but learning how to work in the context of things that they may not be able to predict, but they can respond to in real time. And also in some ways about success as something which is emergent that you can recognize when it shows up rather than a pre-existing, preconceived idea of what's successful. I guess one way to think about it might be I'm someone who helps a person who is thinking about farming and organization in the small scale farming sense, think about how to build an organization that is able to come up with new ideas and new ways of working and to do it happily and in a way that is long-term sustainable.
Thank you.
So shall we dive in, Vaughn, with the bit that I loved in the introduction around some of these techniques and observations that you've had through extensive ethnographic research. But you spent long periods of time observing some of the world's most famous chefs at work in their restaurants, and you've also written about this in your book, The Uncertainty Mindset. Can we start with how uncertainty is actually used strategically in that environment? How does that drive innovation and change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it sounds like something which the Evolving Leader has been exploring and investigating from many different perspectives. So maybe this is a new one, maybe it's not, I don't know. I think the key way in which uncertainty is used strategically by these teams, and in fact, not just by teams working in food, but by teams working in innovation more broadly, is when it is very clearly distinguished from risk. And I'll just say what I believe the difference is. You know, in a situation of risk, you know all the possible actions you can take, you know all the possible outcomes, and you know with great exactness and also accuracy, with precision and accuracy, the relationship between any action you take and any outcome that you achieve. But what this means is a situation of risk properly understood really doesn't exist in real life, right? It exists when you are throwing fair dice or tossing a fair coin. Most of the unknowns that we face in a business context or a strategic context, they're not risky. They're actually truly unknown. You don't know, for instance, all of the actions that you can take. You don't know all of the outcomes that you might achieve. You certainly don't know with precision and with accuracy the connection between any action you take and the outcome you achieve. But I think the most important thing is you also don't have any certainty, or even in some cases, any kind of clarity about how valuable any given outcome might be. Now, where this becomes strategically valuable is when a team recognizes this explicitly. When you can imagine, or at least when you can admit the possibility of an outcome that nobody has thought about yet, that's when you can make something which is brand new, right? So a good example that I think maybe is familiar to many people would be before someone imagined a phone that was portable, a portable phone would have been very difficult for most people to imagine. And it's the imagining the possibility of a cellular phone that makes it possible to set in train the motion of actions that you have to take in order to make a cellular phone, starting in the 70s all the way to what we have today. And it's only the ability to imagine something which doesn't yet exist, an outcome that doesn't yet exist, that allows you to use that strategically to build teams of people that can pursue those outcomes and build themselves so that they can figure out new actions to take or new ways to value the outcomes, so that those ways of working become possible to conceive of and therefore possible to actually do.
So you just landed a couple of big ideas there. One about the distinction between risk and uncertainty, and the other is about the need for imagination. And we've had a couple of guests, and I'm really glad you brought up your definition of the difference between risk and uncertainty, because we've had a couple of guests who've shed light on this. One was the economist John Kay, talking about the fact that, you know, a lot of financial problems are based on the fact that that sector hasn't been very good at making a distinction between those two things. And we've had Martin Reeves talking about imagination as being, again, something that's pretty impoverished in organizational life, for the same root cause, which is organizations are built to de-risk, not to imagine and not really to embrace uncertainty. I'm really fascinated with your experience since you started in this area about how leaders and organizations are starting to kind of accept these things, accept the need for embracing uncertainty and accept the need for imagination. What have you seen as changes there?
That's a very interesting question that I think needs to be unpacked, right? It's like a layer of an onion that you tear off a layer, then you get deeper into it. It definitely is true. So John Kay, who with Mervyn King wrote this wonderful book about thinking about uncertainty in a more, I guess, nuanced way than usually it is thought about. I think he is absolutely right that for the most part, it's not just in finance and in economics that the distinction between risk as a type of unknown and uncertainty as a different type of unknown, that distinction is not generally made anywhere. So it's not just for the finance people, although they definitely do this. It's not just for the policy people, even though they definitely do this. It's not just for the economists, even though they definitely do this. I think in general, we don't have many good ways of thinking about the difference between risk and non-risk forms of not knowing. So let's just park that for a moment. How do leaders get to the point where they can recognize the difference between the two? It sounds strange because I'm in theory on faculty at a business school, but I think the leaders who I have seen who have been best at distinguishing clearly between risk and non-risk forms of not knowing are the ones who were not taught that the two are the same thing. And if I think about what I see in business school curriculums, we always in business school, so I teach at one, we always conflate all the different forms of not knowing, and we generally conflate them under the word risk. And so it's not really surprising when you are taught in management school that what you don't know in the future should be thought of as risk. The approach to dealing with it should be an approach of risk management. So there is an entire intellectual infrastructure that's been built up that we use not only to teach people who are going to become managers and leaders of companies, but also to think about from a perspective of policy making, from the perspective of governance. The way we think about the unknown tends to be through the lens only of risk, the way we defined it, well-known actions, well-known outcomes, well-known causation. There is really no systematic other set of intellectual infrastructures that we have for non-risk forms of the unknown. And as a result, if you go to management school or policy school, and then you become, a middle manager and then a senior manager and then a CEO somewhere, chances are very high that this is the way you think about the unknown, for one thing, characterizing it, and also how you think about managing that unknown once you've characterized it. So this is why I say that the leaders that I have met who have been good about understanding this thing we're facing is unknown, but it's not risky. We can't treat it as risk. We have to treat it in a fundamentally different way. They fall into two broad categories. One broad category is people who never went to a business school, and so were not contaminated by business school thinking. And the other category is people who went to a business school, perhaps, but then worked in something like entrepreneurship. So those two categories of people tend to be the ones who really understand that there are forms of not knowing. I've started using that phrase. There are forms of not knowing that are not risk. And those forms of non-risk not knowing need to be dealt with. You need to take different kinds of action. You need to think about them in different ways. You need to organize your company in different ways to deal with them. I don't know if that answers your question. I suspect maybe I've gone around it.
No, I think it does, and I love the kind of the observation about people who haven't been taught to sort of ignore something and put it into a category, and also those people who probably the entrepreneurial part's really interesting because what you see in entrepreneurs is this kind of natural, and I'm wondering whether it's not just a taught thing, it's also a kind of natural aptitude for embracing or not having to know. Because one of the other things that's quite interesting is the difference between individuals that have this sort of need for closure and need for task completion versus those who are much happier with not. And I'm wondering whether there's an element of that you see in the process.
Yeah, I think it's a great sort of set of topics on which, as they say, we can double click on. I definitely see, because I am one of those people myself, I have a really strong sort of overwhelming need for clarity, certainty, and task completion, right? Like partly because of the culture in which I was brought up. I definitely see that there is heterogeneity, differences between individuals in terms of how much they need something to be clear, how much they need to be able to understand criteria for success in advance of doing a task. So yes, absolutely, there are differences between people in relation to that. Some people are more comfortable with being in a situation where they don't know what to do, they don't know what the outcome will be, and they don't know how they will be measured in terms of success. But I also have noticed from watching people who start like that, but are put in the right environment, and we can talk about what that environment is, that over time you can learn to not suppress, but learn to manage the very embodied feelings of fear, discomfort that come with being put in a situation of not knowing, so that you can voluntarily go into those situations of not knowing and feel, if not comfortable, at least capable of dealing with it in a way that's productive. Right. So I don't know where you want to go now, but we can talk about any one of those things.
Wow, you've opened up so many things there that are exciting, but I'm not going to hog it anymore. Emma, over to you.
Well, I'm intrigued now when I think about individuals, perhaps on those different ends of this scale of need for closure, and those that don't. And then when you put them together as a team who work as well, and you started talking there about the environment that enables that for each individual, but also collectively. What have you been learning, understanding around that environment mix for that?
In terms of, let's start by maybe unpacking that question a little bit, right? Why do some people feel very comfortable with being in a situation where they don't know something, or don't know how to do something, or they don't know what success means? I actually wonder if it's true that there are some people who are naturally just very good at this. I suspect it's actually a lot more nurture than it is nature. I don't know whether I'm right, but my suspicion is that it's a lot more about the sequence of environments that they've been put in. And specifically, I think it's because whenever we're confronted with a situation of not knowing, we have something like a fight or flight reaction, right? It's a very embodied reaction. There's a bunch of stress hormones that show up because your body evolutionarily is programmed to not like situations where you don't know the environment, you don't know how the environment is going to work. In the very, very distant evolutionary past, if you were in one of those environments, it was literally an existential question. Like, you are about to walk into a dark forest, which you've never walked through at night. And if you've never walked through it, you don't know the safe paths, you don't know what's inside it, you have to be ready to either fight or flee. And that kind of reaction to a situation of not knowing, I think, is something which takes evolutionary time to get rid of. But over time, over multiple millennia of enculturation, like the fact that we're living in societies and we no longer live in environments for the most part where you have to walk in dark forests, where you don't know what animal is out there, you don't have anything better than like a spear with a stone spearhead on it. I think what's happened is we've also created the situation where we learn how to interpret the physical feeling of stress, discomfort, of fear that comes with not knowing. So I'll give you an example. If you are watching a movie and it's a thriller, the point of the thriller is that you don't know what will happen. And that causes the same adrenaline reactions that you would have if you were facing a different kind of not knowing situation. But we're trained socially and culturally to interpret that feeling of stress as something which is good. On the other hand, if you're in a different kind of situation of not knowing, for instance, you are reporting to, let's say you're a CEO and you're reporting to your board, and you know that they're going to ask you what your next year's strategy will be to get to, revenue positivity, for instance. It is not cool in that situation, or at least this is how generally we think about it. It's not cool to say you don't know, right? And that causes a lot of fear and stress, the same fight or flight reactions, but we're conditioned to interpret these as being bad. So over time, what's happening is, based on the cultural and social environments that we put ourselves in, we're trained to regard some kinds of situations of not knowing as being good. And so we attach the feeling that we have, the embodied feeling, with, this is a good thing to feel stressed and to feel like fight or flight. And in some other kinds of settings, it's a bad thing to feel that fight or flight reaction. And this, I think, is the basis for why some people are better able to deal with it in some situations than others. They may simply have been trained to interpret the same physical feelings of stress, discomfort, and fear, and say, yeah, this is okay. This leads to something which is good, something which is like learning or enjoyment. And I have definitely noticed that if you train people by giving them opportunities to be in a situation where they design the not knowing so that they learn something or they benefit from it, and it's not very threatening to start with, over time, their ability to do something which they don't know how to do goes up. And I'm sure if you think back to examples that you know from the work that you do with clients and with people on your own teams, you cannot give someone a really big thing that they don't know how to do straight off the bat and hope that they will definitely be able to deal with it. What makes a lot more sense is to give someone something like training wheels, right? Something small, which is unknown. They don't know how to do it, or they don't know what the success criterion for it might be. And then they try it out. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail. But if they fail, it's not a disaster. And maybe if you've designed it correctly, if they fail, they learn something and it's enjoyable. So that the next time you give them something which they don't know how to do, it can be bigger. And the next time it can be bigger, and the next time it can be bigger again. So I think that gradual, I guess I would call it progressive loading of not knowing, is one way that I have seen people eventually get to the point where they're comfortable with being in a situation where they don't know what to do or how to do it. And it's over time, it gets to be something like an everyday superpower, right? The ability to go into a situation where you don't know how to do stuff, or you don't know what will be successful, and just say, I'm going to figure it out. And it's a superpower not only at the individual level, but also at the team level. Building a team that can just go into a client engagement situation or into a rapidly changing environment and say, you know what, we don't know how we're going to deal with it exactly, but we're going to go in there, we're going to figure it out on the ground. I mean, this is the dream. This is what we want to build for a lot of the innovation teams that I talk to. This is what they're trying to do.
Have you got a practical takeaway you can give us about starting that loading that you could do with a team?
Yeah, for sure. So that was a very leading question, I'm sure. I have tools which I've been building.
Yeah.
The first tool is for individuals. It's very hard to use this in a team for now. I'm working with a bunch of people here on building a team version of it, but there's a tool called IDK, and I call it a tool for training productive discomfort, right? So the concept, I guess, is we are uncomfortable when we're put in a situation where we don't know how to do something or what to do. And it's getting past or over that discomfort to actually take action in a way that is designed to learn, to help learning or growth. That is how you get past both the discomfort and also become better at dealing with the discomfort long term. So IDK is a deck of cards. If you're familiar with the Oblique Strategies by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt, these cards are specifically designed as prompts that are very specific, but are not context dependent. So you can use, if you are a user of this deck, what it basically makes you do is it makes you choose to do something which you would not normally do, but exposes you to a new perspective, a new setting, a new way of doing something, or it makes you change the way you do things in general, just so that you understand what that potentially uncomfortable action leads to in terms of growth. And the idea is over time, you can, through your own design of what the prompt makes you do, you can gradually increase the amount of discomfort that you are intentionally putting yourself into. And I guess the concrete thing that this is meant to do is it's meant to get the user of the deck of cards into a place where they can figure out that the feeling of discomfort can be a good thing if the discomfort is caused by something which is designed to create learning and personal growth. And then, of course, we're trying to figure out how to do this as a team. It turns out the transition from an individual training tool to a team training tool is a lot harder than appears to be. So not got that ready yet. But the individual training tool is already available and people seem to like it. Weirdly, a lot of VCs use it and entrepreneurs.
Can you give us one for the weekend to play with?
For sure. So one of the things that people seem to find very difficult to do is to go to a restaurant where you would normally go, but go by yourself and eat by yourself without bringing a book and without looking at your cell phone. That's it.
But I thought you were going to say order something you'd never eaten before, but no, that's a completely different thing. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, that is another one of the cards. You can also order something you've never eaten before. There is a card that says, I don't know why we're only talking about food, but there's a card that says to go to a restaurant where the menu is not in English and it's in a language you don't speak, and to order something without using your phone. I think the idea behind the situation of discomfort, where despite being low stakes, the outcome potentially can be surprising and enjoyable. Right. So the feedback loop you're trying to create is do something which is potentially uncomfortable, but recognize that the discomfort is actually causing something which is potentially valuable and enjoyable, so that you begin to associate the feeling of discomfort not just with stress or the potential for failure, but instead with learning, growth, and enjoyment.
I just want to pick up on that, because I was, in your great book here, The Uncertainty Mindset, which when I first got this, because it was, I think it was in the middle of COVID, I bought it because it came out about 3 years ago, didn't it? And there's a chapter in here called Desperation by Design. How do you innovation teams motivate themselves to do uncomfortable, unfamiliar innovation work? And Emma and I have coached lots of innovation teams through that process so it'd be really interesting to hear how you take this idea of building this muscle of discomfort into innovation teams and what you've learned about that.
Yeah, I mean, I love that phrase, the muscle of discomfort, because it definitely is a muscle, right? It's something that becomes more useful and more powerful the more often you exercise it. But at the same time, it's like a muscle. If you overtrain it, you break it, and then it becomes harder to use it after the fact. So I think the things that I have found in terms of desperation by design. So desperation by design is really just a leader in association with a team committing to doing something which is just a bit beyond the team's capacity, with the idea that that slight push beyond known capacity forces the team to essentially unfreeze its ways of working, suspend assumptions about what the correct way of doing something might be or what the correct resources might be, and forces them to go search for new ways of working, new people to work with, and maybe the thing that leads them to be able to achieve this thing which was previously not possible. So the desperation comes from not knowing how to do the thing, and the by design part comes from not pushing them so far that it causes team collapse, right? So the most common question I get asked about desperation by design is, how do you calibrate the task so that it is just far enough beyond capacity that it causes learning, but not so far that it causes collapse? It's a great question, and there's no satisfying answer to it other than that the leaders of teams who commit teams to these projects have to be working very closely with the teams. And when they are working closely with the teams, the thing that they can see, even if they may not be able to explicitly articulate it, is they can tell when a team is stressed out because it is very far beyond its existing capability, or when it is stressed out because it is just beyond its existing capability. It's that kind of very much tacit knowledge that's owned by the leader of the team that is essential for calibration, right? So I think it's very hard to do desperation by design remotely. And I have seen, because I was actually part of a team at Google that did something like this, when from on high, a very senior member of the management team says, you got to do this thing. I know it's currently not possible, but you got to do it. It turns out actually it's just technically not possible. Can't do it, causes the team to fall apart. But on the other hand, I've also seen teams where the leader works with the team that he or she is leading every day and every week. And when the team collectively, with the leader's guidance, chooses to commit to something which is beyond their capacity, you can see the difference in the emotional affect that results. I think the other thing to say is, in the same vein as the progressive loading that I mentioned before, teams that do desperation by design and do it correctly, there's a few design parameters to it. They are the teams that over time develop the capacity to do things that are further and further beyond their capacity. So the step up each time goes up, because the ability to absorb the discomfort from having to unfreeze yourself, look for new resources, find new people to work with, that's very stressful. It's very energetically intensive, but your ability to do that gradually goes up over time the more you practice it.
That emotional affect is something that's really interesting for me, because as you were talking, I was wondering what you've observed in terms of the way that either individuals or teams get closer to the actual, the feelings of doing this, because that's something that's so important for enabling people to progress and also identify what's going on. So I wonder what you've observed and how you make sense of the emotions that are linked to this sense of uncertainty and disruption in this way.
Yeah, I actually think, I'm not sure if you agree, but the biggest obstacles to people doing the work that they need to do to innovate is not usually cognition. Like everyone cognitively recognizes that they need to try things out that they don't know how to do, which may lead to failure in order to lead to success, right? Why do teams still feel, and why do individuals still feel so hesitant to do things they don't know how to do? It's inherently affective. It may not even be emotional, right? It's affect that doesn't even rise to the level of emotion yet. So I think the emotional management of innovation teams is a really big thing to think about, which we don't have good words for. We don't have a vocabulary for this in the context of innovation yet. And we don't usually get leaders to think about it when they are trying to lead or manage innovation teams. And I think, and this goes to the question, Jean, that you posed, like, what is it that seems to be a good principle, I suppose, for managing or leading a team that is going through this desperation by design situation? I think it's if you are working as a leader very closely with the team that you lead, if you're working with them every day or every week and you're constantly in contact with them, you know how they're feeling because they're expressive. And it's paying attention to this expression that both allows the leader to identify the kinds of projects that will lead to the desperation by design without needing to collapse. And it's also something that allows a leader to, in a long-term sense, manage a person on that team to the point where the emotional fear of failure is something that the person can deal with, right? This is this productive discomfort idea again. Like, we're never going to get rid of the discomfort or the fear of not succeeding. But what we can do is we can recognize it explicitly, and then we can find ways of getting ourselves over it. I'm not suggesting that it's possible to get rid of the fear of failure or to get rid of the discomfort that you face when you are in a situation of not knowing. But what I am saying is that there are things you can do as an individual or with individuals on your team to make it possible to act despite the fear of failure, and to make it possible to get over the discomfort of not knowing so that you can be productive, right? So you can be productive in the sense of trying something new, which you don't know how to do yet as an individual, or working in new ways or having new ideas as a team that may lead to innovation that is both new and useful. So these things are always very small and practical things that are extremely concrete things about how you design the work of teams. Concretely for an individual, it's to repeatedly but progressively increase the amount of discomfort you face out of situations that you design so that they are experiments that lead to learning and growth, even if they fail, right? So that's the basic idea for the individual. And at the team level, it's essentially the same thing scaled up to the team level, right? Desperation by design is simply putting your team into a situation where they don't know necessarily what to do yet and therefore are uncomfortable. And the result, if they fail, is obviously not as good as if they succeed. But if they fail, there is still learning if you design the desperation project correctly. And I guess the way to get to both of these desirable outcomes is to be very mindful about the way you design the actions or the situations that create not knowing, either at the individual level or the team level. I think a lot of people will put themselves in situations that are uncomfortable without having designed the situation so that they minimize the potential for downside, without designing the situation so that they maximize the potential for upside and learning. I just think we can design these situations better and much more mindfully so that you can still have the fear and still have the discomfort, but at the very least, you're learning that this can be a good thing. It can be fun even, right? Just as we've learned that the not knowing that comes from watching a thriller or from reading a mystery novel is a good thing, we need to learn that the not knowing that comes from trying something new in a setting where we may be expected to know everything, that can be useful. It can create more confidence rather than reducing confidence. It's just about changing the associations and doing it gradually so that you don't overwhelm the person or the team.
So I really like the idea that you're talking about here, that you pull apart the cognitive, the emotional, and the affective or the physical reactions to uncertainty. Because there's some parallels here, I think, with the best sports coaches that, in order to be able to provide that growth muscle, it's not just, as you said, not a real muscle, it's also kind of like a mental one as well, that you do pull those things apart, and you can't do that if you're just the rational person coming in and challenging the team to a stretch goal. You have to actually understand what the physical and emotional responses are so that you can calibrate that challenge effectively. So I think that's a really helpful analogy.
Friends, if you're enjoying The Evolving Leader, I encourage you to order a copy of John's new book, Leading in a Non-Linear World, which provides a new understanding of mindset and how to build it in order to thrive in a more uncertain future. It's available online at all major retailers, and there's a link in the show notes.
I just want to turn you a little bit to some of the work that you're doing at the moment, because I think you're writing another book. Is that right? On not knowing?
Yes, I'm trying to think about it.
Well, on your blog, there seems to be a kind of ongoing attempt to doing that. And one of the things that you say here is that anything that's fully knowable or fully known becomes routine and can be done by machines. So it plays into this whole AI conversation. And I'm fascinated because we're talking to a lot of people in this space about this whole idea of how does not knowing play into human value creation in a world of automation? How does it help us to understand who we are in that environment?
Oh my, I love this question. Okay, so I have lots of thoughts, but I think I can be very concise and then we can unpack it if it makes sense to do that. I think one of the really interesting things about unknowns and partial knowledge is that something new can only come out of a situation where there is something about the situation which is unknown, right? Like the moment there is full knowledge of the current situation or the future, all of the possibilities become closed off. Every possible action or outcome is already known about, and you cannot have anything that's new. It's only when we admit to ourselves that there is the possibility of something which we cannot yet predict that we create space for something new to show up. So in the context of machine learning and innovation and artificial intelligence and the creation of value, I think where I'm at right now, and this is just a provisional position. I'm very curious to know if anyone has a view that will change my mind, is that the way we currently think about machine learning is we train an algorithm to essentially pattern match on a very large corpus of content that has been given meaning by humans in advance, right? So when I say given meaning, I'm just saying things like when we decide that this particular configuration of words means a particular thing, like great literature, or a particular phrase that has a translated meaning, the words are an important artifact, but it's how we interpret the meaning of those words or that collection of pixels or this amount of paint on a board that has the sort of human meaning that is valuable to us. At the moment, it seems as though our machine learning algorithms are only able to, in a sense, repeat back to us the meaning that has been given to them in the corpuses of data that they've been trained on. In fact, I'm not sure that most humans are in the business of continually creating meaning in an intentional way. But that's what makes us really human, right? So where does human value creation come from? It comes from the decision to say, for instance, the following combination of words has never been put together before, but I think that we should put them together and that we should call them poetry, right? That's almost exactly the same thing in structure as the following bunch of physical components has never been put together before. And in fact, people don't believe that we can put them together, but I think that we should. And it will turn into a phone that is not only cellular, but also smart. So it's I guess, the thing that makes us human and separates us from machines is the ability to give meaning to an action in and of ourselves, rather than simply copying the meaning of the action from someone else. And that's also, it's very convenient. That also happens to be the only way we innovate, right? Like you can have things that are new that show up randomly, but human innovation is often about some accidental discovery of something that we decide means something, and then we decide to make that meaning make more sense more broadly. I mean, if you wanted me to summarize it in a sentence, I would say that humanness at the moment is about meaning making, not about meaning copying. And machine learning and artificial intelligence at the moment, it seems to me, the commercially available stuff, is about a very sophisticated form of meaning copying from a very large corpus of meaning content. And that has its own value, but to me, it's not the same thing as meaning making from the ground up by humans.
That's really interesting, and again plays into a longer kind of running set of conversations that we've been having on the show. Can you give us any thoughts on what that might lead to in terms of jobs, roles, new competencies that don't exist at the moment in the workplace?
Oh boy. Well, a lot of work that we do is not really about meaning making, right? A lot of human work, because until now, we didn't have machines that could do all this other work for us. So we needed to do it as humans. I think where it gets very interesting is to ask, what is the work that is currently not valued very much, but is about meaning? And also, what is the work that is valued a lot and is also about meaning? So the creative industries are one very obvious place to look. But I would say that even something like developing new architectures for software, that's something where you have to make a decision about a system of trade-offs and priorities, and that's meaning making in a software architecture perspective. You would have to have someone make a value judgment about that in order to make something new that is different from simply an efficiency judgment that you could make from having a bunch of algorithms horse race against each other, right? So even the criterion for the winning of a horse race between algorithms, that is meaning in the form of criteria for success. To answer your question more specifically, right now, if you look at how we use machine learning and artificial intelligence, we use it through a natural language interface, right? So stuff like ChatGPT, we talk to it to ask it a question, and then we get back a response. Or Midjourney, we talk to it and we get back a response in the form of a picture. It seems as though the meaning making work is being done by ChatGPT or by Midjourney, but actually, to me, the meaning making is being done in writing a prompt that gets you something which is very interesting rather than something which is not that interesting. So I guess if I were being asked how to think about what will continue to be valuable in the future in terms of work, I would be looking at work that is inherently about meaning making, even if it doesn't appear to be. So stuff like prompt generation. And I would be looking away from things which are about pure reliability of work and repeatability of work, right? Contract review, or another example, commercial art, where what you're doing is you're taking, for instance, a particular shoe and you're applying 35 different colorways to it as a graphic artist. That kind of work, I think, will be very easily disintermediated by machines. It's the person who designs the shoe itself in a way that is completely bizarre and not like what market research groups would say is a good shoe design. You know, stuff like, I think some of the Rick Owens shoes that have been coming out in the past, if I recall the name correctly, those are things which you would not look at market research and say, yes, this very weird biomorphic bulbous shoe that looks kind of gross, that's not what most people want. But at the same time, that is definitely what's driving the next generation of shoe design forward, because you see the lineage of that in stuff that's come out in the last like 6 months or so, right? So it's the decision by some person or some team of people that this thing that nobody else thinks is good has meaning, and the meaning is value. That's the work that will continue to be valuable in the future. And then at some point, the machines will be able to do that too. And then what will make us human will change again. The next step of what makes us human will be something different from simple meaning making. But right now, I think it's still there. Meaning making is still the thing that makes us human.
That's a really good place, I think, to bring it to a close. Can you just give us a sense of what you're working on at the moment? What's next for you?
For sure. So what's next for me is trying to push this distinction between risk and uncertainty a little bit further. I realized as I was writing that first book, The Uncertainty Mindset, that it is true that we don't distinguish enough between risk and uncertainty. But at the same time, in the last 2 years, I've been thinking about the many, many, many different kinds of non-risk uncertainty that we face. You know, we face not knowing about what actions are possible, like I said before, not knowing about what outcomes are possible. We face not knowing about causation. And we face not knowing about value. And when I look at how different people deal with situations where they don't know what actions are possible, or when they look at situations when they don't know what outcomes are possible, it becomes very clear that we need to think about each one of these types of uncertainty differently. And that's why I now have a project to think more rigorously about not knowing, the different types of not knowing that we face. Because having an undifferentiated group of things that we all call uncertainty, but we have to deal with in different ways, is not helpful. Being able to say, not knowing about action, we deal with that by experimenting with actions. Not knowing about outcomes, we experiment with that by thinking about ethnography, by thinking about scenario planning. Not knowing about value, we think about that by philosophy, basically, right? Like articulating arguments for why something might be valuable or not valuable and the trade-offs that result. Like the tactical things that you do concretely in the face of each one of these different types of not knowing, I think are different. And then that obviously has implications for how we, as a company or as a leader, how we might deal with the situation of, not knowing actions or outcomes or values when we face them. Because I think the underlying motivation for what I'm trying to do is to get clarity about situations so that we can have situation-specific strategy rather than this amorphous blob of strategy that we currently have.
Brilliant. Well, I think let's leave it there. Vaughn, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully the quality of the internet hasn't eroded too much for our listeners here, and we definitely want to have you back to carry on this conversation. But for now, we must say farewell, and to our listeners, the world is evolving. Are you?